Here we go. Okay. Welcome to the Prince George's County Historical Society's August 28th, 2023 History Chat, entitled Historic Preservation in Action. I'm Donna Schneider, president of the Historical Society, and we are going to be recording this chat, so please mute your microphones. And we will then put this chat on our YouTube channel, which you can get to by visiting our website, www.pghistory.org. We will answer questions at the end of this chat, or if Brian or Ed ends up seeing a question in the chat as we're going along and wants to answer it, feel free. But otherwise, we will get to our questions at the end. So tonight we will be chatting with members of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission's Historic Preservation Unit, Edward Day, Gina Vaughn, and Brian Carroll. They will talk about their work in preserving and restoring historic structures in the county. They will share their challenges, successes, and what goes into their work and thinking. We will learn about the work being done at Compton Bassett and Upper Marlboro and other park and planning sites in the county. So now a little bit about Ed Day. Ed Day has been with the commission since 1994 and has worn many hats, starting as the director of Riversdale House Museum and building the site as a local, regional, and on the national and international levels. He has also served as assistant division chief and now heads up the team of historic preservation professionals as the chief historic preservation officer. Ed credits his time spent as a student of David Fogel, the former associate dean and historic preservation program founder at the University of Maryland School of Architecture, with his foundation in the field. Let's see, since we do have Brian on, I'll go to Brian next. Brian Carroll is a registered architect and the historic asset, project coordinator. As a New Englander, Brian attended Bates College in Maine, as well as the North Bennett Street School in Boston, earning a diploma from their preservation carpentry program. Interestingly, while working for a local preservation contractor, Brian and Ed met several years later when Brian was restoring the Riversdale dependency. Shortly after, Brian enrolled in the architecture program at the University of Maryland, graduating with master's degrees in architecture and community planning. After several years working as an architect, during which he served as a Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commissioner, he found employment with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission in 2016. Gina hasn't joined us, but in case she does, I'll add her little bio. Gina Vaughn graduated with a BS in History and African American History from the University of Maryland College Park and started working for the Department of Parks and Recreation in September 2001 as a historian with the Black History Program. She then managed and became countywide coordinator of the historic rental programs and the Black History Program and sites. In 2018, she began work with the Historic Preservation Unit, where she has flourished as the preservation project manager and found her passion, historic building architecture, resource maintenance, and saving old structures. So I will now turn it over to John Peter for the conversation.
Thank you, Donna, and welcome Brian, Ed, and we'll welcome Gina when she finds a parking space also in our very crowded parking lot. Well, I'm really happy to have this conversation. Ed, I assume that I met you when I was somehow, well, I don't even know. When I became a historic preservation commissioner, you're one of the first names I remember hearing about. So we go back, what, 20 years, something like that?
Yes, I think so.
We've had our moments in the sun and moments in the rain. And then Brian, I've been knowing you for 5, 6, 7 years now and the work you've done. So I'm very excited to have you, and hopefully Gina will join us. Your team is dear to my preservation heart because you're the actual preservationists. You're the guys that, as far as I can tell, go out and make sure the old buildings are as new as they were when they were built, and that they're standing and they are useful, or could be used. And you pour your hearts and souls into making sure that we have this grand collection of the 3-century history of Prince George's County. And that's my little bit here. I'm going to start right in, Ed, as I'll ask you the question. So exactly what does this unit thing do?
Well, we represent the forward-facing component of our division within the Department of Parks and Recreation that actually operates museums and does the interpretation. That's differentiated from, say, the Arts and Cultural Heritage Division that has historic properties, but they rent them. They're not interpreted, but we help guide the preservation efforts there as well. So we are with the National Historical Resources Division, as Donna mentioned, and park and planning is a fairly large animal. There's a planning side, and there's the recreation side, and we're on the recreation side. So I know you guys know that, but it's I think helpful to reiterate it. We also have a division called Park Planning and Development, and they do some of the larger capital projects. And I think, John Peter, when you approached me about talking about in this meeting, you'd mentioned Compton Bassett, and I think that Compton Bassett really illustrates a lot about control and who does what to who, and it's a preservation learning playground.
And it also happens to be in my backyard, which is convenient.
Well, there's that.
It's hard for me to ignore Compton Bassett, which means I make it hard for everybody else to ignore it.
Well, it's a special place, And
let me just focus a little more on what you just said, the front facing. But your unit, you're the people that are out actually touching the structure and interacting with the structure and the buildings and the outbuildings and the entire, what I refer to as environmental setting for the historic site, right? I mean, you're the practical, on the ground doers.
Yeah, we consume these places, and Brian and Gina, Brian especially, loves to get into attics and basements and crawl spaces, and really run into the Russian nuclear reactor when it's necessary. But it's really important to understand it, and I think that's the reason why Brian's background is helpful that way. Having gone to North Bennett Street School, he understands. Not only he's an architect with a graduate degree in planning and architecture, but he also knows the fundamentals. So I would say, Brian, you have a little bit of built-in engineering there, don't you?
I do, yes. And my children make fun of me because when they take my phone and look at it, it's pictures of bricks and joints and plaster, and so yes, it is. It's our passion. It's what I love to do.
I'm hoping that in the minutes that we have tonight, that the two of you, and when Gina comes, that you could give sort of specific examples. And Brian, you mentioned bricks.
Yes.
And for me, historic preservation is one continuous learning thing. Are you trying to tell me there's more than one kind of brick? I thought a brick was this orange-red thing.
Yes, as it turns out. Yes, as it turns out, there are more than one kind of brick. Yeah, it's the constant problem when we start working on a building. We have to find bricks that are compatible in compressive strength and the correct size, which is, if everybody's making their own bricks, everybody's making them slightly different. And so we have to find things that match. And it's not always easy. We have to hunt around and buy big lots of bricks in order to get what we need, but we generally get it done.
And sometimes another thing that I learned a decade and a half ago, so if I manage to find the right brick, then you're the guy that comes and tells me, oh, that's the wrong mortar mix. Did you buy that at a local commercial place? And I say, oh, yes. And then you give me a 20-minute or longer explanation of the multiple kinds of mortar appropriate to whatever kind of brick I thought I had.
I would never presume. What we've done in order to cut off a lot of the problems is that we've proactively done mortar analysis on, I thought we had done everything, but every once in a while something comes up that we haven't tested yet. But each of our buildings comes at this point with a mortar recipe. So anyone that works on the building, we just give them the recipe. We have taken samples, sent them to U.S. Heritage Group in Chicago. They've done an analysis, including, the size of the sand, the color of the sand, the whether there's any Portland cement in it, the mixture of sand to lime. So we have a recipe for all of our buildings. We don't let anyone touch our buildings without, having that recipe in their hands.
And this attention to detail and knowledge of the history of construction, it's more than just bricks. I mean, I picked bricks out, but this applies to the different wood types and lumber used both on the exterior and the interior. I'm assuming that you've gone into buildings, gone in and then said, oh, this probably is not quite safe because some kind of structural something is cracked in the middle. Do you run into that kind of thing also, I assume?
Yeah, what we find is they use what they had as far as wood goes locally. We get into our presentation about Compton Bassett when we were doing the restoration for the chapel. Brian, you can speak to this as well. We found they'd use poplar, and it's not a really good wood to build with, and it's very hard to duplicate or replace. In fact, it's near impossible. So we opted for another softer wood that would sort of replicate that. But I mean, where do you go find milled poplar? It just doesn't really exist.
Yeah, and we do have things milled for us. We have a relationship with, we've had people saw oak timbers for us, both red oak, white oak. We had a little bit of poplar sawn. So yeah, there are places we can have somebody go fell a tree for us and saw it up.
So in addition to this structural architectural knowledge and the construction techniques going back 3 centuries or more, there's also a knowledge base of the actual history of the site, what it looked like before it was occupied, what it looked like in the technical thing, period of significance, and most importantly, what it looks like today and what perhaps it could be, though that's not, if I understand correctly, your bailiwick, but adaptive reuse is in the back of your mind. In other words, we've restored, we've protected, or you have, I haven't done anything, the building, but you must have in mind, this building, yes, maybe it was a chapel once, but we're going to get this fixed up such that another division could come in and find a use for it with as close to the original construction technique and material as possible. Does that sort of sum up what's going on here?
You just hit on a number of different topics there, John Peter. This is all nuanced. And again, we geared this conversation to discuss Compton Bassett because it's just got so many facets to it.
I'm gonna turn that. You're gonna get the mic in a minute. I'm just setting the stage here.
But yeah, I mean, all buildings need to be used. It's like as if you had a car and you let it sit in a parking lot and it seemed like it's okay, but not being covered, and even if it is covered, the motor needs to be started, the wheels need to turn, gaskets need to be lubricated so that they don't dry up and crack. A house has to be lived in, a structure, a dwelling has to be lived in. It's just part of it. And so, when we restore these things, we like to, first of all, we don't do it in a vacuum. We work with the constituency. And if it has a constituency, then we try to work with them and figure out what the end use may be. Riversdale, Montpelier, Dardanelles, Chance, those are all park and planning. buildings, his lordship's kindness. It's not. I mean, they all had constituents that wanted to see things done, and therefore that reflects their use now. Brian, you want to add on to any of that?
No, I was a Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commissioner for about 8.5 years, and I, one of my contentions is that buildings that are unused are in danger, and we can fix something up and close the doors and leave it alone for 10 years, and you come back and it will not be in good shape. They really need a life, and there's a certain number of museums that you can have, and that works. Rental facilities works for some buildings, not for all of them. But yeah, I think it's important to find a life for the buildings. And really, frankly, if we're going to spend taxpayer money, there has to be something that comes out the other end of that.
Well, that said, and with my large introduction of preservation, I now, Ed, hopefully are going to have the wonderful conversation of what's up with Compton Bassett and the challenges that you and the team face, the solutions that you found, and I'm excited to stop talking.
Yeah. Well, with that, by now the catering should be everybody's house, knocking on the door. We got a sumptuous feast for everybody. Just kidding. But it would be fun to be down at Compton Bassett. Maybe next year we'll do that, John Peter. We threatened to do the Historic Preservation Week reception down there, maybe get a Korean taco food truck or something and spend the Saturday out there going through the three centuries of history that we have. Brian, I suppose you have your, can you
no, one of the things having a technical issue, it says screen sharing disabled. So somebody has to allow me to share my screen.
Donna, could you give us the keys to the car?
Let me try and give you the co-hosting ability.
Please and thank you. But while we're doing that, Compton Bassett is.
You should have it, Brian.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Compton Bassett's one of the most compelling places that the Park and Planning Commission owns. It's also a bit of a conundrum in the sense that it's really inaccessible. It was the historic property was gained as an afterthought. The initial thrust to get the property, and I think it was actually from descendants of the Sassers, was to add on to Patuxent River Park as a buffer to the river. And initially, there was no plan on getting the historic building. There were those that knew a little bit about it, and then those that tried to warn people off. And they were warning us off because the building is sadly unzipping, as they say. So the bricks are coming apart from the mortar. And Brian, you have full authority to jump in when you want to. I'm just trying to give an overview. You can see on those images on the left there, the bricks just simply were starting to fall out of the building.
And I apologize if people can't decipher the second picture from the left at the bottom. It is because PowerPoint has deigned to turn my picture sideways and resize it, so it makes no sense. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, you can see at least the bricks there. I think it's good.
The one on the left is fine. The one on the right is sideways and distorted.
So in August of 2011, and it might have been about the same time, it kind of coincided with our ownership of the historic envelope. There was a massive earthquake. It's centered in Mineral, Virginia. It was 5.8 on the Richter scale. And a lot of the historic properties took it on the chin. I was at Riversdale and we had some fractures there. Bostwick, I think HL, His Lordship's Kindness, had that as well. And of course, Compton Bassett was weakened. Later on in 2013, there was another earthquake, and not long after that, a storm, and it brought down basically the end of the chapel. Brian, you could advance a couple screens. I think it might be, there it is on the left bottom. That gaping hole was where a chimney used to be, and it was behind an altar on the bottom left. On the top right is after we fixed it. It was terrible. I mean, it looked like a 500-pound bomb had gone off around it, and what to do, because we'd just taken ownership of this property. There was no capital improvement monies available at the time. And so we did what we could to try and stabilize it. And then we came up with a plan later on to restore it. And this is part of the conundrum at Compton Bassett. We won 2 major awards, one from AIA, and then the other one from the American Building Contractors Association. But sadly, because the site is not accessible, nobody can see it. Hence my desire to maybe have an open house down there and show people through some of the successes that we had. Brian, what am I missing on this? Anything you want to throw in?
No, just, if you ever have a chance to go out there, the main entrance, I would challenge you to sight along that wall. What you'll see is a significant bow in the wall. When we were working on the building, the contractor said, "Oh, well, the wall's bowed, so of course we have to take it all the way down to the floor and rebuild it." And we went to an engineer and said, "Is it stable?" And they said, "Yes." And we said, "Then deal with it the way it is. You're not taking our wall down." So the wall has got a pretty significant bow in the middle of it. Yes. And yeah, there were a lot of challenges along the way. Sorry, go ahead.
So that was the main thrust. All the attention went into this collapsed chapel, and to try and save what we could of it. It's a rare specimen, and so of course we focused on that. But at the same time, we were thinking about what we might be able to do to the house. And Brian, if you go back up to the first page, we can show you a little map of Compton Bassett in the gray area. So it's an intact cultural landscape. So you got a main house, a chapel, SmokeHouse, the cemetery, a concrete barn from the early 20th century, a garage from 1929, I think, or 1919, either way. You've got 18th century barn that Brian's going to show you some images of later. That really, we thought we were going to lose it. And Brian, I'm not going to steal your thunder because you were the one that supervised it.
Sure.
But it's just a tremendous salvage job of that,
Yeah. And there are
how many acres is this roughly?
This piece, I think, is 235.
Right. That's close enough.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say is that there are at least 3 other buildings that are not on this map because the scale of the map becomes so distorted you wouldn't be able to see anything.
Right. There's the tenant farmer's place that we
down here, down in this direction. There's a collapsed barn that is off the map in this direction, and then the barn that Ed was discussing is down towards the river.
So originally this was riverfront property. Well, it still is riverfront.
Yeah. If you look at the building and the pebble dash on the outside is obscured all of the moldings, but if you go on the inside, there are these magnificent Palladian windows on the second floor, front and back. So it's got symmetrical facades, one facing the river, one facing the road. So you could have approached it from either direction, and it makes sense.
So yeah, the road goes all the way down there now, and it's just interesting. Again, it's an intact cultural landscape, and it's a shame. It's got a falls garden, and it's just an amazing property. But what it doesn't have is money, and what it doesn't also have is a constituency that would stand up for it, advocate. And so we're doing this right now, basically trying to plug the dike here and there. Once we finished with the chapel, we were looking at the main house, and it's gorgeous. Brian mentioned the Palladian windows. I've never seen them as beautiful as that. So we worked with PP&D, and the decision was made because we didn't have the resources to basically mothball it. And so if you skip to the next screen, on the left, you see it before and it looks intact, but it's covering, like Brian said, the stucco, the pebble dash is covering up those faults that you see in the lower corner. And so we worked with some engineers. This was not our team's work, though. This was done with park planning and development I mentioned earlier, and a guy named Joe Mathai, and they shored it up. And you're seeing extensive shoring on the pictures on the right. Ryan, would you say it's almost like a spider web on the inside, the way that it's
Yeah.
braced.
The building is filled with scaffolding. So if you were to go on the inside, basement, first, second floor, and attic are completely filled with scaffolding, bracing the building all the way from the grade, the ground at the bottom of the basement, all the way up to the rafters. And then the entire outside is covered in scaffolding and bracing.
The good news we found out from the aforementioned Joe Mathai is that when he worked with the engineers and the firm that installed the scaffolding, that it was set up so that if we came up with the money and then there was some type of effort to restore it, that could immediately be reused to help us do the work. So it wasn't a complete and utter waste. I can say this, and Brian, I know he agrees. We don't like to spend money we don't think we're ever going to get back, because we don't have a lot of money to throw around. And so for us, I think we kind of disagreed with this premise, because we felt like, had we been able to make, and I have to be careful what I'm saying, but if we were empowered to make those decisions, I think we would actually work on the structure rather than set up all this shoring and scaffolding.
I think that's right. And we've talked to contractors then and since, and actually fairly recently, about working on the building. And what we would probably do is approach it one wall at a time, strip the pebble dash off. And really, there are multiple layers to this, because if we were able to strip the pebble dash off on the end of the building, there's some conjecture that this could have been a 5-part building like Riversdale. What we would find under there are ghost lines of openings and things that would start to tell us. Dennis Pogue from the University of Maryland would be down there in a minute if we strip this pebble dash off. We would probably do quite a bit more archaeology, but I think there's a lot to be learned. And I think in talking to contractors, we could stitch these walls together and move around the building maybe one season at a time until it's completely stabilized. But there are some opportunities for work here.
Right. There have been a lot of people down there to take a look at this. Brian just mentioned Dennis Pogue, who was at Mount Vernon for 30 years and was teaching at the University of Maryland with Don Linebaugh. Both Don and Dennis have been taking classes down there, every year, sometimes twice a year, to do some measured drawings and things like that. And, earlier, John Peter mentioned, us accessing photos and things like that. These guys help us do research, try to find Habs photos. They do their own documentation. Sometimes we have a collection of drawings. There's just so much to it. But we're really pleased to have those folks down. Yeah. Brian, if you advance to the chapel, so this will kind of make a little bit more sense. So we kind of feel like if we had the ability to do so, we could knit that house back together like we did the chapel. You've seen that wall now a few minutes ago, and again in the upper right corner there it is restored. We do believe that we could do the same thing, but none of this is cheap. John Peter mentioned about trying to match the brick. What we found in some of the archaeological excavation down there, sponsored by the State Highway Administration, Julie Schlevitsky in particular, was we discovered a couple of brick clamps, which is where they actually fired bricks on site, which is kind of not unique, but it's kind of neat that we were able to find them, because those things don't really exist too much anymore.
It's within about 50 feet of the end of the chapel is where they were actually making the bricks to put this building up.
All right. So, we go.
Ed, I just wanted to say, just to jump onto what you were saying before, is that we have a very good relationship with the historic preservation program at the University of Maryland, and we make our sites accessible to them whenever they need them. We feel like we benefit from their eyes on our buildings, and they have a playground to teach kids about preservation, but we can bring them into sites like this that have, real work going on, and allow them to see what we're doing. But yes, our buildings have become kind of a playground for the historic preservation program, and that's very purposeful on our part.
Right. Well, advancing to the next frame here, Brian, you can start to talk and look at some of the successes that we've had down there. This building was in terrible shape, not unlike main house. And you can see the lower left corner where the bricks are just being spit out of this thing as well. And one thing that I think is really interesting next to it on the right is sort of a honeycomb of Portland cement, which was too hard for the soft brick that it was trying to hold together.
Yeah.
And it's failed because the water attacked the brick rather than the joints. And but Brian did a great job on this. And we did consult with Dennis. You want to talk a little bit about the process there, Brian?
Yeah, yeah, and John Peter, to your point about materials and so forth, what happens when somebody, well-meaning people trying to save the building, put Portland cement on really old soft bricks is in the expansion and contraction over years, the bricks on the front of this building basically they turned to powder, is what happened. We could have vacuumed most of them out of the front of the building. And what was left was just this matrix of Portland cement. So we did that. We took all of it out, and we had the mortar analysis done. We found the correct bricks, correct size, correct compressive strength, and had my young mason from Annapolis rebuild the walls. And he did a really good job. The building, this building in particular, has a lot of artifacts in it that are Willie Graham from Colonial Williamsburg Foundation walked in and walked by and said, "That's an 18th century ladder," and kept going. And I almost fell over. But there are casks and salting. There's a salting tub in here. The rafters in the interior are all blackened from the fires that were in there. There's a small fire pit in the middle of the floor. So this building really needs archaeological investigation. But the most recent thing that we did was we put a metal roof on the building. The most recent roof that came off was a cedar shingle roof. And in discussing this with the folks at University of Maryland, the thought process here is that as soon as metal would have become available, any farmer would have put it on their building. So Dennis Pogue was saying that the building probably had a metal roof on it longer than it ever had shingles on it. But the other thing is, in a delicate building like this, if we were to put the shingles back, even if we used a nail gun, that would be hundreds of impacts on the building. If we nailed it by hand, it'd be thousands of impacts on the building. By putting this metal roof on, it's screwed on every, I don't know what it is, every 18 inches or something like that. So it's very few penetrations into the building. It's protecting it, and it's reversible. So we had to get the building covered up in order to save it.
Right. It was all about protecting the resource, just the best way to do it, for sure.
Guys, just for the audience and for me, this is the SmokeHouse, right?
That is correct.
Yes.
Right. And what historically happened is this where everybody went out back to smoke?
Yes.
Yeah, they were in the cigars back then and martinis. No, this is where they salted the meat. This was a valuable place for them, valuable commodity. It got them through winter times. I did a post on this on the Prince George's History Facebook for Park and Planning in the last year or so. And it's a unique resource. It almost looks like the day in the interior almost looks like the day they just close the door and walk out. I mean, it's so preserved. But yeah, it preserved meat. So
yeah, what they would have done is take the meat, soak it in a brine, and then hang it from the rafters. And what you would see if you went in there is that all the rafters are kind of fuzzy and rounded on the top from years of having hooks hung on them with meat hanging below. And then they would start a fire in here. There are no windows in the building, just a single door and some vents up near the top. And they would put a low smoking fire, and you can see the fire pit set into the bottom of the floor. I should have put a picture, but I did not. And they would smoke it for, I don't want to specify how long. I don't know enough about smoking, but for probably a week or more, driving all the moisture out and sealing up the meat so that it could be preserved and they could eat it over the next year.
Well, that answered my question. Thanks.
Good. The little holes in the gable there is where the smoke would travel out. tried to trap as much as they could in there.
Yep.
All right. The next one is next to that is the dairy.
Yep.
Brian and Gina advocated for the removal of a modern addition. Got a similar metal roof.
Yes.
Brian, nice photo of that that masonry there. It looks great. Oh,
yeah.
And look at that roof.
Yeah, the roof was in bad shape. There was a modern addition, and when we start to look at things like this, we're looking at the dairy, and you can see there are hewn timbers. There are wrought nails in this thing, and then when you go to the addition, we're looking at circular sawn lumber. We're looking at wire nails. The methods of construction, just butting braces up and nailing them with a wire nail and so forth. There was no evidence that the addition was a historic building, and it was covering a well, and it was the building was in bad shape. It was badly in need of repair, and we didn't want to repair this modern appendage, so we got the permission from the Historic Preservation Commission to remove it. One interesting point is that these are two small, similar-sized buildings, both on the front lawn of Compton Bassett, but they were not built at the same time. And when you look at the dairy, it's a Flemish bond, which is that every other brick is, there's a brick that's running along the face of the wall, and the next one runs back through the wall, front to back. The next one is along the wall. If you look at the SmokeHouse, it's a different bond pattern. It's several rows of horizontal bricks and then a row tying them all together perpendicular to that. So we don't know exactly when they were built. This building is labeled as prior to 1741 and probably older than the SmokeHouse, but there's a lot left to be investigated here.
You mentioned that they're on the front lawn.
They are. I'm going to jump back several slides and let me show you the map. Okay, so the small map that's on the right side of the screen, you can see the house in the center. The dairy and the SmokeHouse are just to the left of it. The chapel is below and kind of to the right. And another building we'll show you is a little further up at the top of the picture there. But if these are basically on the front lawn of the main house.
Not to divert the conversation, but in the 17th century, wouldn't this have been the back of the house?
Yes. If people were approaching it from the river, they would have been behind the house.
Yes. Okay. Move
there
on.
Is a driveway lined with an alley of trees that goes straight away from the dairy side of the house. So there is a driveway of some age there that would have approached the house from that angle. So.
Right.
All right, I'm going to go back to the dairy. If I hate it when people jump around on slides, so I just want to tell you where I'm going.
But you were correct, John Peter.
I just couldn't resist.
I know. When you got it.
And just as an anecdote, there's a young mason that we had work on this, third generation mason, lovely young man. And Dennis Pogue, who worked at Mount Vernon for a number of years, came by and looked at Sam's work, and he said, "Not bad." And I saw Sam later, and I said, "Sam, that is the highest praise you are ever going to get from Dennis Pogue. That is probably the nicest thing I've ever heard him say about somebody's brickwork." So he did okay. And that I wanted to put that in because what we found is that, and it's a little comical, between about knee height and about 5 feet off the ground, you'll find all the bad repairs by all the lazy people because that's what they can get to. But if you go a little further up the wall, we were able to find the tooling marks from the original mortar and match those so that the new mortar tooling matches the existing.
Jumping ahead to the next frame, we're going to jump into the early 20th century. This thing was falling apart. I mean, it just was a mess. You can just take a look at this on the left. We can't make this stuff up. The degradation is just amazing and astounding. And Brian's worked with some great contractors to get this thing turned around. And I think one of the neatest bits of this story were those shingles that you found, the metal shingles.
Sure. This is a building that's a little out of period with everything else there. It dates from, there's a date in the top of the wall that's from 1915. It's an interesting barn. The whole first floor of the barn is a reinforced poured concrete structure. Somebody had access to commercial construction techniques. They formed this up and poured it in 1915. Above the first floor, there's brick with some parging on it to make up the walls above the first floor. But the roof had collapsed and was, there were vines in the building. It was in really bad shape. And the roof was covered with 9 by 12 inch metal shingles. And when I pulled a few of them down and looked at them, it was like a gravestone rubbing thing where I was able to find the name of a company called Berridge. And I looked them up, and they're in Texas, and they still make these shingles. So we were able to get a supply of the shingles and have the building re-roofed in the appropriate shingles. So there are Berridge 9 by 12 metal tiles on the roof there.
Yeah, the thing about this is we've got such a collection of buildings, dwellings, farm buildings that could really tell a story of Prince George's County and an agricultural legacy that was here for 3 centuries, and this is just one of those. Maryland Historical Trust, it's kind of funny, they see the old colonial building and it's nice and everything, and then they see some of the other structures, but they really get worked up. So there's an echo with these other support buildings. There's another garage that's very similar to this up near the house in the 1920s, and these guys just think it's fantastic.
And we are currently working on this. We have a carpenter that works for us that's has just made some doors for this building, and there's a few windows that we have to put back. Kevin also made some doors for the garage, which is 1929, I think.
Right, are those the doors that Kevin made in the lower right corner?
They are, yes. And he has since made the other 2 doors on that side and one on the rear. And then we'll start working on, you can see there's a boarded up window there. We've got a few things. So the thing about the way we go about this work, and one of the reasons that we're able to do it, is that we've been breaking these projects down into pieces, that we understand the process. We know what has to be done. We can bring somebody in to reframe the roof, follow that with somebody to put the Berridge shingles back on, and then come in later with our carpenter to build the doors for it. This building's out of period for the site, so we have a little more flexibility here. But Kevin is trying to recreate what he found there. We've had to replace some hardware and things, but yeah, it's always a series of projects to bring these things together.
If we advance the next one, we step back in time a little bit further. The Livestock Barn. This was just an incredible project.
Yeah,
I mean, you can see on the pictures on the left. I mean, you took your life in your own hands to go in there, and just an incredible job on this one, Brian. I mean, just really is.
What had happened was the photo on the upper left. There was a tree that had grown up, and when people are not paying attention and leave things alone for 20, 30 years, the tree grew up, and what it did was it basically lifted the timber that was holding up the second floor of this barn up and pushed it right out of the side of the barn. So all of the floor joists on the second floor in that photo in the upper left are cantilevered out into space. There's nothing under them. There's no wall there. And there's a photo in the lower left that shows some sagging sagging timbers in the back. The roof was fairly unsupported. There's an unfortunate picture that's turned sideways of the Mennonite gentleman that helped us repair the frame. He and his sons came out and did this work for us. But they put that timber back on the second floor, put posts under it, saved everything that was there, pulled everything back up to square, put siding on it, put a roof on it. So the building is stable and it's safe. But it's a really beautiful. This is in my opinion, one of the most important barns that we have. It's pretty spectacular. And it's baffled a lot of people. It's had a lot of work done over the years. It represents multiple periods. And we've not been able to get a firm date on it. We have really great technicians that we work with. We have people that restore our buildings, but beyond that, we have somebody that does microscopic paint analysis for us. Matthew Mosca can tell us exactly what color something was when it was first painted. We have this terrific gentleman named Mick Worthington who does dendrochronology. And if Mick can get sufficient samples of the wood, and he has a little tiny core drill that he pulls out cores of the wood, and he will compare that to historical weather data. And he can generally tell us when a timber was felled, and timber frames are put up, they're cut green. You don't dry timbers and then cut them. It doesn't work. It's a horrible, horrible thing to do. And I'm sorry, I joke because I had to do that once, and it's just trying to pound a chisel through hardened oak is just almost impossible. So they're cut green, so he can tell when they were felled. That is within a few months of when the barn would have gone up. He's been able to do that on most of our buildings. He has not been able to do it on this one. There's kind of too many different periods, so he's kind of finding conflicting data about things. But we'll wrestle this one to the ground at some point.
It's one of the oldest ones in the county. Hey, Brian, there's some really cool stuff in these photos. You want to talk about that joint at the top of the page?
Yeah, there are main carrying beams that run through if you were to step in the large door at the end of the building, they would be to your left and right, holding up the second floor, supported by cedar posts running down the building. Obviously, we don't have trees that are that long, so they have to be joined. And what you're looking at is called a scarf joint. And what I would point out to you is that it's a diagonal joint, but then there are points on both of those timbers. And the reason for that is that the way this joint goes together, those timbers can't twist out of plane, so that they are held together so that one won't twist relative to the other. What's hard to see there is that there are two large pegs going straight down through that joint. And I had the good fortune to be able to do quite a bit of timber framing in Massachusetts, and have cut a few of these. It's really kind of a fun joint to cut. Just below that, there's a lock mortise for a small storage room on the second floor of the barn in the back. That I just think is beautiful. The lock is not there anymore, but what you're looking at is the piece of wood that housed that lock and the cutout for the key and so forth.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yes.
Back to the Mennonites, they don't use a lot of technology, and so we kind of feel like working with them is kind of going back in time and using some of the same approaches they would have used when they actually put the barn up, and I think that's why they're successful. It's just an amazing process. We use them over. This is the same team that we used over Concord.
Yes. Yep.
So
yeah.
And
they've done a number of things for us. They farm in the summer, and in the winter they repair barns. So we're able to get their attention for one project a year. Yeah, they're lovely people. We've come to understand each other. They know we're serious about what we're doing, and we know that they know what they're doing. So, and that really has been a process over the last, I've been doing this for 7 years for the commission, but finding the contractors that, we've had fits and starts. There are people who can talk a good game, but they can't deliver. And then there are people who can actually do the work for us and do it in a way that we need them to. that's been gratifying, putting together that stable of people that we really trust to do this work.
Yeah, to underscore that, Brian, we've had, sorry, Don, hang on. We've actually had contractors that said they could do it, but actually inflicted some serious damage. One site in particular is Mount Calvert. So I think we're at the end of our slide show here, the PowerPoint. Donna, you were going to ask something or make a comment?
Well, I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, gentlemen, but we do have a couple questions and we are getting close to the end of our hour. So I'd like to get share the questions.
Should I close this?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Then we can see each other. Let's see, let me get back to where I was.
So the questions are actually from Lynn Roberts. Did you find, whoops, all of a sudden it dimmed on me. Did you find foundations of the earlier house that preceded this late 18th century example?
Yes. Yeah, there's archaeology on the site to suggest that there were buildings on the front lawn of Compton Bassett, not necessarily in the same orientation. It's not been taken too much further than that, but this is certainly not the first building that was there. There were things in the same site, and then there's I've had people tell me, and I don't know that it's true, that the original building was closer to the river, that it was down the slope a little bit.
Okay, and then the second question she has is, might either the meat house or dairy, have been built to accompany the earlier residences?
Knowing what we know, I think it was to support the structure as we know now. But it's hard to say. That site is just a mishmash of dwellings, previous dwellings. You can put a shovel to the soil just about any place and come up with some type of artifact or something that's part of the archaeological record. It's crazy.
Well, there's evidence that the chapel was built in two phases.
Yes.
The dairy is not contemporaneous with the smokehouse. It's possible it predates the house that's there. It was a living landscape. People worked this land, and it was, there's tenant houses on the property and a corn crib. We certainly didn't show you all the buildings. There were 14 buildings on the site when we took it over.
Okay. Oscar Gregory has asked, would Brian or Ed be able to recommend someone with their great preservation skill sets to be able to assess a Maryland 1732 house outside of the county?
Worcester Eisenbrand in Baltimore.
Okay.
To work on it, to assess it, you're talking about an architectural assessment like we've done?
If you want the work done on it, they're the people to talk to. If there's,
right.
If you want research done, there's other people that I would point you to. Eon Research. But yeah, there's a lot of people that we work with, and depending on what you want to have done, if you want to have the work done, Worcester Eisenbrand is kind of the Swiss Army knife preservation company locally.
If Oscar would send his specifics to the Prince George's County Historical Society, the society would forward that email to Brian and Ed for specific answers.
Happy to do it.
Okay. Ann Barrett said to say thank you, love it, and can you share something about costs?
Cool.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is that the way that we have gone about doing this, we've got a fair amount of experience in historic preservation. We've seen people do things well and badly. We're pretty cost effective in the way we go about these things. The roof on the barn, the concrete barn, I'm not going to remember all of these numbers, and I can put them in ballparks for you, but was say $30,000. And we had people bid on it that wanted to spend $150,000 on it, and that's just out of the question. We did not. The gentleman that we have do the Mennonite guys that work for us, I had a conversation with them early on, and I said, "You're going to undersell me, and I need to make sure that you're still in business next year. So I need you to give me a reasonable bid for this. Don't try to sell me. Like, don't send me something so low that you're going to lose money. But that said, we'd probably pay them half or a third of what a large contractor would charge us. But I am very cognizant of trying to protect them. I don't want to pay people so little that they're going to go out of business, because we need them.
Right. The other thing I would say is, we've all been exposed to supply chain issues through the pandemic, and prices kind of got up there if you could find material.
Yeah.
However, I will say that during the pandemic, this team continued on. The contractors were still doing work. We never stopped. I mean, I can't say we ever, sat at home too much or in the office. We got plenty of pictures of the team out with masks on at sites,
and
getting work
I think, to the contrary, we actually accelerated, because
Yeah.
all of a sudden all of our buildings were empty, and so we had an open field to run in, and so we actually did more work when things shut down.
Yeah, it was quite
Okay.
an experience.
So Stacy Hawkins said to say thank you, Ed and Brian. Wonderful
Thank you,
presentation and wonderful work you all are doing at Marietta.
Yeah, that would be another fun one to show you. There's lots of good work going on at Marietta. Always stuff to do there. So we have some really beautiful sites, and Stacy does a wonderful job with that one.
Great. Well, I was going to say, you guys do great work, whichever site you're working on. So
Marietta's got a really neat project that we're in the middle of right now to recreate really the front portico. And we're using archaeology and Willie Graham and one of Brian's architectural colleagues out of Annapolis to do fantastic work, Kimmel Studios. What's the place on the Eastern Shore in Queensland that we went, Queenstown, that we went to, Brian? Not Oatlands. What was it called?
Cloverfields. Cloverfields is a restoration of a building on the Eastern Shore that, if you haven't seen it or heard of it, if you could go see it, it's pretty magnificent. It was done. It's one of the preservation projects that was done. Just absolutely everything was done. I mean, they had somebody grind custom pigments for the paints. They had somebody make every single nail they put into place. It is just a masterful, beautiful restoration of a building.
Okay. Ann Barrett says, we're working on the exterior of the Marche House in Prince George's County, and so appreciate what you do. So,
well, good. Invite us over. We'd love to come see it. We love to talk shop. So.
Yeah, that's a neat house for sure.
So Ed and Brian, thank you again for joining us this evening. And we greatly appreciate all your insights on what you do to help preserve our historic sites within the county.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for your support.
Oh, always. Appreciate you guys supporting us in return. For everybody, another Oscar just says thank you so much.
Thank you, Oscar.
Our next history chat is on September 25th. We'll be talking with Richard Friend, who, if you attended our Historic Preservation Month reception, you'll see he's one of our awardees for the St. George's Day Award. So he'll be chatting with us about Laurel, and he just is coming out with a new project talking about the Capitol Center and its 50th anniversary. So we'll probably have a little discussion about that as well. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. And oops, I see one more question. Carolyn Johnson says, thank you. On a personal note, I am particularly fascinated with this project since I was a patient of Dr. Robert Sasser, whose medical practice was in the home in the 1950s. Is there a renovation plan for the home, and what will the use of the property be after completion?
Well, we need that group of people that wants to step up and say, hey, this means something and we should, restore it. That's, you have to have the constituency. Like I mentioned, none of these things were done in a vacuum. But having said that, we'll do what we can to knit it back together with what resources we have. In the meantime, any images you may have of having gone to the doctor at Dr. Sasser's place would be helpful. I know at Riversdale, as we started getting that place up and running, you can't believe the stuff that came out of the woodwork and people's attics and photograph albums and things like that really helped us. You know, it's easy to overlook a picture. Oh, there's Compton Bassett, and we're standing there, and you might look at it's a pretty house, but we're looking at, like, did it have shutters? You know, was the pebble dash there? What'd the roof look like? That kind of thing. And so clean out your attics and let us know what you have.
And I know we're just about out of time, but I just want to say on a side note, I'm sure Dr. Sasser was a nice man, but I have a reputation for crawling into holes under buildings and stuff. And when you go in that basement with a flashlight and the cobwebs and the old medical equipment, it really looks like something out of a horror movie. So yes, I would like to restore it to something that's friendly looking, because it scared me to death when I went down there.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Again, thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Good night.
Thanks, Donna.
Everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
I can find where I